here we are with the last Orange Star mission, and I'm sorry this has been delayed a lot. I've been really, really busy lately. And yes, this is Adder. I won't really talk about him much at the moment because we'll be seeing a lot more of him later, and yes, we're gonna really, really learn to hate him for certain reasons, which will become very obvious. And this is the first mission so far where you actually get to choose your commander. And I'm choosing Max for this one, and I'll explain why during it. Basically, Max is really good for factory missions. Now, of course, the last mission of every continent is always a factory mission, and obviously that there is the factory. They always work in a certain way. And I mentioned earlier that Max is very good at missions that require destroying a specific structure, mainly because of the extra power on his units like medium tanks and bombers. In fact, Max's bombers are actually capable of destroying something like a cannon or, in this case, a pipe in one hit. That's without any power boost, by the way, with just his natural abilities. Oh, and we have Neo-tanks now, which is good, but yeah, like I mentioned in the previous mission, they cost a lot. So you really won't be able to afford them until very later on in a mission. Much later. And yes, as you've seen there, the factory can spawn units, which, now the way it works, it's kind of random, but the units don't actually cost anything. So if you think you can stop it by capturing all the enemy's properties and eliminating their source of income, you can't. It'll still keep creating units. And because it's kind of random and you never know quite what's going to happen, I mean, on some turns it won't even produce anything, on some it'll produce like 3 helicopters or something scary. It's generally best to stay away from the entrance to the factory, unless you're sure you can block off maybe at least 2 of those entrances. Because just like all deployment properties, if you block off its entrances, it can't produce anything. And here it is. This is how every factory mission works. There's always a pipe seam, and you'll need to destroy that to shut down the factory and thus complete the mission. So, like I said, Max is very good at destroying pipe seams and the like. And thankfully, there is an airport located conveniently close to that pipe seam, which is good. I mentioned before that Max's bombers can destroy it in one hit, but in this mission, spamming battlecopters is probably just as effective. Now, of course, we want that base early, just so we can make a quick advance on the airport. Since there are a lot of rivers around that airport, mech units are a good idea. I probably haven't mentioned this before, but mech units are actually better at moving through difficult terrain than infantry are. In fact, just about everything they can cross is at a movement cost of 1. If you don't understand the term movement cost, you don't really need to. It basically just means how hard it is to move through the terrain. Now, here is the flaw to Flak's, well, I hesitate to call it a strategy, it's more like just attack now and slaughter them. Basically, he doesn't really, well, at least on this difficulty, he doesn't really defend that pipe seam very much, which is what you'd expect any smart person to do. So he focuses more of his forces around the left-hand side of the map, which is likely to become a huge choke point. So if you choke that area with units and try and defend it as much as possible, his attack will kind of get bogged down, and as long as you keep holding him up there and distracting him, he won't really defend that pipe too much. And so you can focus on getting some battlecopters and possibly bombers, but that's probably going to be cutting it a bit fine for the S-rank time requirements, over to the pipe. That's generally the strategy we'll be using for this mission. Of course, Max does have one problem with this, namely, he's not really good at big defensive situations because of his, well, I'm gonna say total lack of indirect support, because his artillery are pretty much useless. Okay, we've got that base, that's good. Now, you need to focus on getting the base on the far left side early. He just created a missile unit from that factory. That will probably become a problem later on. Not at the moment, but those things can wipe out copter units in one shot. Right, now we're getting that airport, which is good. Probably best to send infantry over the river to get those other cities. And yes, that base right there. That it's very useful to get that one early, because he's sending a huge swarm of infantry down. Good thing is they're only supported by recons and artillery, so we can pretty much handle them just with some... Make sure that tank doesn't get damaged, but that tank should be able to handle them pretty well. And these two infantry should try and cross the river and get those cities. Yeah, creating recons early on is a good idea for Max, because as direct combat units, they get his attack bonus, which is pretty useful. They'll cause pretty devastating damage to enemy infantry. Yeah, you'll notice that Flak only has one deployment property that isn't a factory, so... yeah, he'll generally just be sending units down that end of the map. Now get that base. And these cities will be helpful too, although he'll probably try and take them later on. Right, now time to get first strike on them. That artillery won't be in range of us. Another thing about APCs that I find I sometimes forget, that once your APC has done its job sending infantry off to a far-off base, don't forget to send it back to help your other infantry. Well, just mainly saying this because I often tend to forget it. Yeah, I don't want that thing hitting my recon. And that anti-air unit is not looking good either. But thankfully we have a tank there. And yeah, already 9 minutes in, and we haven't really made any significant progress. Yeah, this mission is a lot longer than the others before. It's going to be 3 parts, not counting an extra one that's just the dialogue at the end. Now we want to protect our capturing units. Now, if I leave the tank there, it will be exposed to that artillery unit, but really, I need it there to block off the area. And I've got another tank, which is good. Now, hit that mech, definitely. It's the only thing that poses a threat to our tanks. yeah, Max's recons versus infantry on roads is pretty powerful. And yeah, soon this thing's going to turn into a major defensive choke point, which Max isn't really so good at. The only thing he can really do about that is to just keep sending unit after unit into the choke point and just attempting to break through. Of course, once he gets enough energy for one of his CO powers, breaking through becomes a lot easier. And once he does, then, well, he's going to be running rampant through a large area of the map. Of course, in this mission, we're not really going to be breaking through all that much. I was about to create an artillery there, and then I realised, oh yeah, Max's artillery suck.